Hello, and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Kimberly Schulz from California. I feel compelled to tell you that Kimberly interviewed twice in a row for this podcast. The first time failed to record, so she came straight back and did it all over again. It's not an easy thing to do because you wonder if you're repeating yourself and if you still sound fresh. So to give you a little bit of background on Kimberly, she was born in the Midwest of America and made a sudden and very courageous move to California with her husband, 2 sons, and young daughter. It took her only 3 days to find a job once she arrived there, and a job that meant she could homeschool her daughter and study herself. She said being a server was the hardest job that she's ever done. She also shared with me her saddest part of menopause is being able to have only 1 glass of red wine a week, as she truly loves red wine, which perhaps is something many of us can relate to. But she's also grateful to this life phase, as it has shone a light so bright on herself that she has been forced to face her demons, which has led to a deep healing. So this is the second interview in which Kim shares her thoughts and feelings on menopause with a great gentleness and inner strength. Kimberly, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
Thank you very much for coming on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your perimenopause journey as it stands so far.
Well, for my journey, when I started to get perimenopause symptoms, I was going to school full-time and homeschooling and working full-time. So I didn't really start paying attention to my symptoms until I was 48, but I'm pretty sure they were happening before then. But the first thing I noticed was my weight distribution. It shifted to the middle, which was not fun. I've always struggled with how I view my weight, and having it go there. There was like the least place I wanted it. So that kind of caught my attention, and I didn't understand why that was happening. And then I noticed that I was having anxiety and depression more often, and I didn't equate that with my periods until a few, like 3 or 4 times that it happened. I realized, oh, this is a new symptom of PMS, but I didn't understand that that was the symptom of perimenopause actually. And then I started having my periods I would go 3 months without one, and then I'd go 3 weeks and have another one. So I began to understand that this was more than just new symptoms, surprising me, that it was actually something else. And so since nobody warned me about any of these symptoms, it began my Google obsession with, is this perimenopause? It was kind of like a game. Is this perimenopause or is this something else? Nope, it's perimenopause. I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, nobody told me a lot. So it was finally when I finished school, I finished homeschooling my daughter. She graduated. So the only thing I was doing was working full time. And I began to be able to take some time to figure out what was going on with me. And that's when I realized that it was perimenopause.
How did perimenopause itself come onto your radar?
My mother-in-law would have hot flashes, and there was talk of hot flashes being part, and the word perimenopause didn't necessarily come up, but they would say it's part of menopause. Mm-hmm. So I would hear that. I would hear, hot flashes, they're awful. I'm no longer sleeping with my husband because I just need to cool down. So there was a lot of that, and it was just called part of menopause. It wasn't called perimenopause. I found that word when I started trying to figure out what was happening to me. So that's kind of when it came on my radar, was when I could no longer ignore that there was a lot more happening than hot flashes.
And was that your principal symptom, or was there anything more significant?
Hot flashes were definitely not my principal symptom. They barely bothered me. Mostly it was at night. I realized that if I didn't have a late night snack or had a light something like Cheerios or something like that, cereal. I didn't sweat as much at night, but it wasn't an issue for me. I would just get up and sleep on the couch and then come back to bed when it was over. It wasn't a big deal. The main symptom was the anxiety and depression. Yeah, those were the two big ones that really got my attention, was when those became going from, a few days a month that I experienced them to every day.
Mm-hmm.
And since I struggle with OCD, the OCD got worse and it had been under control for years and years. And that started to become problematic. So, yeah, those were my main symptoms. It was mental health that really caught my attention.
So what did you do to help you through it?
Sure. I found that exercise was number one. However, I am a pretty big advocate for medication, and I have not ruled that out for me. I am investigating hormone therapy replacement. And so I definitely see that down the road. But for right now, there was a lot of therapy and journaling and exercise, definitely. I think as moms, or as women, even, you don't have to be a mom, as women, we tend to give so much that we don't see ourselves as people. At least I didn't. I remember one day just going, like, I don't even see myself as a person. I'm a machine. I'm giving to my, I'm homeschooling my daughter, so I'm a teacher. I'm, working full time, so I'm just a machine that's getting things done. And because I needed to keep myself so busy due to past trauma, that was one of my ways of dealing with it. I was just so busy that I didn't see myself at all. I think once I was able to not homeschool and graduate from school as a late learner, I began to understand that I was neglecting myself pretty severely because I did not see that I was valuable or that I was someone as deserving of giving as I was giving to others. So I needed to understand that I needed to give to myself because I was valuable, I was necessary, and that I was worth it. Yeah, I just didn't place a lot of worth and value on myself as a person, as opposed to my value and worth being in what I could give to my family and to the community.
For those of us who are not in the States, so you are West Coast, what is the healthcare like for women experiencing perimenopause?
I would say, because I am in the States, that there's a great disparity between those that have and those that have not. So for me, with a generous employer giving me great healthcare, my experience I consider great, even though I had to go through 2 doctors to get to the third one that actually knew anything about perimenopause and the different types of things that could help, like hormone replacement therapy. But there's many people who don't even have healthcare, or if they do, it's very limited. So I think for the States, the disparity is just so obvious in the healthcare, not having universal healthcare. Yeah, there's a lot of women who suffer way more than I did in this. And for me, I had to go through, I had a doctor who said, well, we can't do any hormone replacement therapy because you're too fat. And that was like, and I have good health care. So you just have to advocate for yourself because, I don't know how it works in the UK, but for me, I have the ability to switch doctors at the drop of a hat because I'm in a healthcare system called Kaiser, and they have all different doctors, and you can pick and choose your doctor within Kaiser, and they're all in the same building, so it doesn't matter. So for me, I feel I was very lucky to have that a lot of women in the States don't have that ability, and I think they suffer for it.
Going through 3 doctors in itself is something, but did you find that they have good knowledge and understanding of hormonal fluctuations that we experience at this age?
I think that my third doctor definitely has. I feel like she has experienced it and knows. So I did try to go for, it's a toss up between a younger doctor and an older doctor. The younger doctor has, like, they're fresh out of medical school, right? So they're getting the newest information. But then an older doctor has experienced some of the things I've experienced in real time. And ultimately, I decided that that was more valuable. So I went with a more experienced doctor, and she definitely just laid it out, the different therapies and things that could help. Whereas my family doctor just wanted to give me like antidepressants. And that's great. And maybe someday I'll need those, but it's targeting a effect and not the cause. So I feel like the doctor that I have now is very knowledgeable in the hormone replacement therapy, and also just other things like getting more exercise and maybe trying meditation, or doing the other things of self-care that women tend not to do for themselves.
Have you implicated any lifestyle changes?
Yes, I definitely have started to eat healthier. Again, it goes back to valuing yourself. You always make sure your children have their vegetables, but you're just eating the scraps off their plate, basically. But just eating better, having more colorful food, more vegetables, and more fruit. And living in California, it's a lot easier to do than living like in the Midwest of the States. We don't get snow, so we can just grow all year round. So it's much easier to have access to fresh food. So just taking advantage of that has been really helpful to me. And then also exercising. I got a treadmill during the pandemic, and that was super helpful because I live in a busy area, and my OCD wouldn't really, I couldn't push past it to get outside because there's a lot of people here, especially since I'm right by the ocean. And so having a treadmill to use was very helpful to me to help with that, to help with all of the symptoms, the OCD, the stomach issues that no one tells you about, the depression and anxiety, just getting that nervous energy out. It was very helpful. And of course, for me as a Christian, it was my higher power definitely helped, although I tend to avoid when I'm feeling depressed. And so there were times when I didn't do any of those things. I didn't go to my higher power. I didn't exercise. I didn't eat properly because I was in this mood, this depressive mood. And, it probably was around a period that I didn't know I was going to start because my periods are all messed up.
Is it easy in your community to talk about this now that you're experiencing and learning? Are there other women in a similar position?
Um, I know there are women in a similar position, but it's not easy to talk to them. I think my job, I'm around a lot of older ladies, but I work for a church, and I think they just don't think it's proper to talk about that kind of stuff in a professional setting. But I don't have that same filter. So a lot of times I do bring that up around them, going like, why didn't anybody tell me about this? And, they shake their head. Yeah. Oh yeah, that happens. And, then they like try to go somewhere else because I'm a chronic oversharer. And I don't know, maybe it's the area. I kind of thought California would be more, I'm from the Midwest and the States. So I thought coming out here, they'd be a little more open. I don't know why, but it feels they're about the same. So yeah, I found most of my information on Google because I don't have that community that talks about it. That's why I talk about it all the time, because I want to open the door to anyone who needs to talk about it. And, my latest blog post was about that. And I don't have a lot of followers, but the few that I have definitely discussed it. My other sister, she had a hysterectomy and she already has a lot of mental health issues. So there was no way for her to differentiate, like, is this for this or is this for that? But so she was super shocked at the symptoms. She had no idea. And my other sister, I think, is because of our past, is more out of touch with how she's feeling than even myself. So I really had no one to talk to about it other than knowing when it'll probably end, because I guess that's the biggest indicator is your mom and your sisters and when it ended for them. So I have that hope that there is an end in sight, but that's about the only thing they gave me. So yeah. So I do tend to overshare about it just because I don't want anyone else to feel like no one told them something. And it doesn't seem fair that there's so many women around you and nobody is telling you what's going to come next. Like no one's telling you what to look out for. No one's telling you that, maybe you should start practicing self-care before you get to that point. It makes it easier because when you're in the midst of depression and anxiety and your stomach's upset like way more often and you're all these changes, it's really hard to kind of turn and change how you've been doing something for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So, I feel like if someone had said, this is what's going to happen to you, and I'm not kidding, like maybe I would have taken it a little more seriously.
So how are you preparing your daughter?
I'm preparing my daughter, I think, just by sharing with her everything. We have this rule in the house that there's nothing off limits to talk about, regardless of how we feel about certain things. It doesn't matter. So when my boys are in their 30s. When they were young, from age 12 on up, I had very candid discussions with them about sexual education because I never received that. And so by the time I was 18, I had 2 children. So I didn't want that. My whole goal as a teenage mom was that they did not do that. My goals got loftier as they got older, but so we had very candid discussions with my boys about women and using protection. It was like a yearly thing, and they'd be like, "Ugh, we've heard this like 5 times. It's okay, we get it." But with my daughter, it's been more just her being able to share with me how she's feeling. Boys don't tend to share much about how they're feeling, but I just wanted her to be more open, and then I would share with her what I was experiencing. So I'm hoping that she's well educated on what she has to look forward to when she's in her 40s and or even late 30s. I don't know when it will start, but she at least, if I haven't talked about it enough, she at least knows she can come to me with questions.
And having awareness is half the battle, because if you know something's coming, then you know to look out for it and then ask questions.
And I can't underestimate advocacy, and I'm trying really hard to teach her self advocacy because she, with her mental health, is always going to have to deal with doctors. She's always going to have to advocate for herself, and with the stigma around mental health, she's always going to have to stand up for herself in how she treats her mental health. So I just strongly try to emulate advocacy and also teach her how to do that for herself.
If somebody came up to you and asked for an insider's tip on something that you haven't been told but wish you had been about perimenopause, what would that be?
Yeah, I think just the hot flashes are the least of your problems, typically. I mean, some women, I suppose, don't experience, I mean, everybody's unique, but hot flashes come and go. But it's the other things that just tend to stick with you. Yeah, I wish someone had told me about all of that. Because sometimes you're just like, what's wrong with me? And maybe there's some self-blame, or I just need to snap out of it, or, there's no reason for this. What's your problem? Just to let them know that when you experience these things, that it's not your problem. It's just your hormones are doing these things, and to give yourself a little grace, or a lot of grace, during this time.
What has been your silver lining of menopause?
I think for me, it's been that it has forced me to deal with my past trauma. It's forced me to look at myself more, go to therapy. I couldn't ignore it any longer. It just, things that had already been percolating in me that I've been ignoring for so long, I just couldn't. So it did force me to go to therapy, which led me to this awesome book that really, really helped me. And I don't know that I would have done that if it hadn't been like, I have to do this or I can't function. So I think that was the silver lining, is just pushing me towards therapy and better self-care, just realizing I can't coast anymore, and that I just needed to see my value and worth as a woman, and that this whole thing is just part of being a woman, and that there are lots of other women going through the same things, and I needed to reach out to them also. I wish I had known sooner what was going on so that I could have spent more time properly having self-care and taking care of this before it got to the point that it got to, where, I was feeling like I was going to go crazy. But if I had known what was going to happen ahead of time, I feel like I could have headed it off sooner and better, better self-care, better ways of managing how I was feeling. And even like with stomach issues, even understanding that that was part of perimenopause, I would have spent less time blaming myself and other things. I think what I want every woman to know is that they are valuable. They are not just created in there to serve everyone else, that they are valuable people, that our self-worth should come from ourselves and not from what we do. It should come from who we are and not how much more stuff we can do, what our production rate is. And so to listen to our bodies, to check in with ourselves. However, I know that every woman's at a different stage in life, but just even 2 minutes before you get out of bed, or however you can do it, to just be silent for 2 minutes and kind of check in with what you're feeling in your body and to know how important you are.
Thank you ever so much for your time twice. Thank you.
You're welcome.